Good afternoon. This is the Black Blogger, part two of my celebration and paying homage to Ralph David Abernathy, president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King on April 4th, 1968. Dr. Ralph David Abernathy was the pastor of the West Hunter Street Baptist Church. This speech he gave is the Poor People's Campaign speech, the memorial to Dr. Martin Luther King. The greatest memorial that we can build to the life and work of Martin Luther King Jr. will not be through mortar, brick or stone, or even through pious and sacred services, as important as they are, but it will be through the continuation of his humble and courageous efforts to break loose the shackles of injustice and the bonds of inequality which have enslaved the black and poor people of this country for generations. Yes, even for centuries. The greatest memorial that we can pay to our brother, our friend, and our leader is to keep forever alive the nonviolent movement for which he lived so nobly and died so gallantly in seeking to improve the conditions of the poor, the garbage workers, the men who pick up the filth and waste in Memphis, Tennessee, the least of these which Jesus talked about and which Martin so often preached about. Martin Luther King is physically dead. His body has been buried. Its temporary resting place is in a simple crypt at Southview, a cemetery once used to bury black slaves. But what he devoted his life to and gave up his life for cannot be put to rest with days or weeks of mourning, nor can it be put to rest with a chorus of praises to his courageous leadership and greatness of spirit in raising memorial buildings or scholarship funds in his name. Martin Luther King devoted his life and gave up his life to confront certain fundamental evils in this nation, the evils of racism and needless, oppressive poverty. Unless each one of us does the same with our limited courage and our limited ability to strike to the essentials and our limited power of eloquence, but with all the courage and intelligence and eloquence we can draw up from the well springs of our own spirit, unless we do this, we have no right to claim that we suffered personal loss by his assassination. Martin Luther King was not, of course, the first to identify the evils of racism and economic oppression. His genius, however, his great gift was the commitment and the ability to confront these evils morally and physically, totally and positively. Another way the segregationists would say this, perhaps, is that Martin Luther King was a troublemaker. Of course, we know he didn't create the troubles of racial and economic oppression, but he did try to make these troubles of the minority into everybody's troubles. And we thank God for him. Thank God that he lived in this generation, that our lives were touched and inspired by him, that our souls were moved by his meek, gentle, yet powerful spirit. You may rest assured that he will live as long as we live, as long as our children and their children and their children live. Yes, even as long as history books are written and this civilization shall stand. Now, I'm going to stop talking about my dearest friend and closest associate, Martin Luther King. I'm going to even stop talking about other people and begin talking about us, myself and you right here. For it is my hope that I will be the same kind of troublemaker. The same kind of troublemaker that Dr. King, Amos, Hosea, Jeremiah, Jesus, and Paul were. I'm here to trouble you with other people's troubles, poor people's troubles, And not only black poor, but also red poor and white poor and Spanish-speaking poor, American poor. But really, I hope that you realize long before now that these are your troubles anyhow, without any help from me. Sometime in the last 3 years or so, sometime between Watts and last month, for example, you must have gotten scared. And today, I must sincerely admit that I am afraid. As has well been said by an outstanding American, when I think of my country, I tremble with fear. No, I'm not afraid for my personal safety. I'm not afraid of losing my job or even my life, but I'm afraid for America. Yes, I'm afraid for the richest and most powerful nation in the world, for its leaders and wealth, and those who shape and mold its destiny simply do not realize that a nation cannot live by wealth and prestige, bombs and missiles, guns and ammunition, armies and navies alone. Let me go back to this question of being afraid. Maybe at first you thought you need not be afraid if you were black. You must have gotten over that illusion by now. Maybe you thought you need not be afraid in Atlanta, but now you know that Atlanta is not really so different than any other American city. Now you really have no choice whether to worry about poverty and poor people's problems. They are your own problems. They are every American's problems, and the only possible safety is going to have to come from unity and creative, militant, nonviolent action. The Poor People's Campaign to End Oppression of Racism and Poverty is going to make some trouble. But it is America's chance, your chance, to keep out of worse trouble. Let me state it simply. A nation that can so easily afford to eliminate real poverty just cannot afford not to. 2 or 3 years ago, this might have sounded like a purely moralistic truth. But now I think it is purely clear that it is also an economic, materialistic, and political truth as well. Let me remind you that it is suicidal for any society to develop a people who do not feel that they are part of that society. And they have a stake in that society, for it is a true fact that rather than be ignored, they will eventually rise up and not only shake the very foundations of that society, but they will destroy it and even destroy themselves in the process. And they will willingly do this because they have nothing to lose. The nation can no longer afford its false economies and its political compromises and evasions. It can afford to house and feed and educate its people decently, and it cannot afford not to. It cannot afford to suppress and exclude its poor any longer. It cannot afford to jail them and shoot them down in a frenzied spiral of rioting and looting, of burning and rebellion. The bill for generations of irresponsibility, oppression, and neglect is being presented for payment, and it is long overdue. The interest is compounding. The price is higher than it would have been, and is getting higher all the time. Whatever it costs now, it will cost more if we try to put off payment until next year. In any case, there is no choice in the end. The bill is going to be collected willingly or unwillingly in a civilized human decency and love, or in fear and hate and flames of destruction. Time is not running out, but rather time has run out. The Poor People's Campaign is very possibly the last attempt anybody is going to have to make a deal with these problems peacefully. To demand payment on this long overdue bill in a constructive, civilized terms of jobs and housing and food and education and decent guaranteed income for those who cannot work and who should not be out working for wages but home caring for their families and raising their children. This is all going to cost money, a a lot of money to begin with. We're not talking about a few more job training programs that place a certain percentage of their trainees in companies that have few openings. We're talking about decent jobs for all who need them in massive public action, whatever it may cost, to provide these jobs. And we're talking not only about jobs with decent pay that you can raise a family on, but jobs producing what people desperately need. So when we talk about housing, we're not talking about a little more of the same old urban renewal. And we're not talking about changing the label on the same old package from urban renewal to model cities. We're talking about decent housing for millions who need it, and we're talking about now, not the year 2000. And when we talk about education, we don't mean the assignment of a few more lawyers to enforce token compliance with a civil court decision that called for deliberate speed 14 years ago this month. And we don't mean a few more pilot programs or a 10% increase in Head Start. We mean real education for all with all the properly trained teachers that it takes, and with decently paid teachers' aides and everything else needed that is required to give every American child a chance to learn what he or she needs to live in a decent, productive life in America today. And when we talk about guaranteed income, we don't mean just restoring the 1967 cuts to the welfare program. We don't mean forcing women to take menial jobs when they should be home caring for their children. And we don't mean forcing men who cannot support their families to abandon them. And we don't mean forcing men who cannot support their families to abandon them. We don't mean raising the price of a great variety of indignities that the welfare system has developed to humiliate the helpless. What we're talking about is an income level that a family can live on, and decent housing with food to eat and stay healthy on, and clothes to wear and warmth and dignity. And we're talking about this income as a matter of right, not something to be begged for or in exchange for snooping and prying into one's private life and begging one's relatives and sacrificing one's dignity. A guaranteed minimum income sounds to some people like a wild and practical radical experience, but in truth, it is an ancient basic rule of human society that no one should starve when there is plenty. A people that ignores this rule is not a true human society at all. This nation has tried the radical experiment of violating this rule, and it is a savage failure. To persist in this failure is not only brutal, but wild and impractical. What we are demanding is massive and comprehensive and expensive. It will require many huge new laws and many new appropriations. The resources that we are demanding look large compared to what is now being spent in those areas, but they do not look large compared to what's being spent on the occupation and bombardment of a small Asian country with which we have no historical, political, or economic ties. They do not look large compared to what is being spent to send weapons to countries all over the world that have nothing to fear so much as their own armies. They do not look large compared to what's being spent to keep an American army in Europe on the theory that they are defending our former allies and our former enemies against attack from a Russia that no longer even controls most of the communist governments of Eastern Europe. And the resources we are demanding don't look so large compared to what is being spent in the exploration of space or the building of superhighways. They don't look so large compared to what's being spent on direct and indirect subsidies to some of the richest and best developed industries, some of it even as in urban renewal and agriculture, for example, being subsidies that were originally established for the supposed benefit of the poor, in name at least. No, we know that no American need be without an opportunity for a decently paid work producing what millions of Americans desperately need. We know that an America which can afford to send arms and armies all around the world and to build millions of new air-conditioned offices and luxury apartments in middle-class suburbs and thousands of miles of new highways does not need to imprison a fifth of its population in constantly deteriorating, always more crowded and yet always more costly slums and ghettos. We know that no American needs to starve so that the rest of us may eat, and that no American mother need to be forced to choose between starving her children or neglecting them. And we know that no American father need be forced to abandon his family so that they can qualify for a grudging handout at less than subsistence level in exchange for their own human dignity. No, we're not begging for charity. We are demanding civilized justice. We're not asking for favors. We're talking about equality. We're not asking that anybody give away what he has earned, but that everyone and everybody have the opportunity to earn for himself, to create his own prosperity, to be free. And we're not threatening violence, for violence is already here. We are against violence. We deplore violence in any form. We are against violence because we know that the only potent weapon available to oppress people in their struggle to achieve justice and equality is nonviolence. Violence is immoral. It destroys not only the oppressor, but it destroys the oppressed as well. It never permanently solves any social problem, whether it be in the home, community, city, state, nation, or even in international affairs. Yes, violence is immoral, but not only is it immoral, it is mostly impractical for the poor people in this country. We do not have the guns, the weapons, or resources necessary to carry on a violent campaign. The police force, the state troopers, National Guard, and Army are completely controlled by those who deny us our constitutional and God-given rights. The oppressor knows how to deal with riots, looting, and violence, but they do not know how to deal with nonviolence. We do not have the guns or do not have the guns or weapons for a violent campaign, but we do have the soul for a nonviolent thrust. These are experienced souls. We didn't acquire these souls yesterday or even the day before. We have possessed them for generations. They are true, tested, and tried. Our forefathers used their souls when they were bound in chains of slavery and caught the crippling shackles of fear. We have used these souls all the way from Montgomery, Alabama, beginning on December 5th, 1955, up until the present time, through soul force. Not violence, we have integrated the buses in every hamlet, village, town, and city in this country. Through soul force, not violence, we have integrated the lunch counters in America and desegregated the hotels and motels and other public accommodation facilities. Through soul force, not violence, we have won the Civil Rights Bill of 1964, and we stood against the powerful Bull Connor in the vast steel city of Birmingham. Through soul force, we walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma and won the Voting Rights Bill of 1965. Through soul force, not violence, we have given new hope and meaning, dignity, and worth to every Black American citizen in this country today. And it will be through soul force, not violence, that we will keep the final dream of Martin Luther King, the Poor People's Campaign, and build eternally a monument to him, this life and his work. Through the Poor People's Campaign, we will create a jobless society, put an end to poverty and disease, and bring about the city of brotherly love, where every valley is exalted, and the hills and mountains are made low, and the crooked straight, and the rough places are plain. Yet we will toil unrelentlessly until the glory of the Lord is revealed, and men will beat their swords in the plowshares and their spears in the pruning hooks and study war no more. Self-determination in the allocation and employment of these resources is absolutely essential. If self-determination does not guarantee the success of every venture, yet at least we have learned by bitter experience that lack of self-determination guarantees failure. The resources allocated to housing must, for example, be under the full control of those who actually need the housing. We have seen for 30 years that when control of resources designed to rehouse the poor is given to government agencies, the agencies grow large and the contractors grow rich, and the highways and office buildings and luxury apartments and sports arenas and concert halls replace the slums, and the people who are displaced are worse off more than before. The instrumentalities of control and self-determination must be real and practical and not mere illusions. They must include individual ownership, cooperatives, partnerships, and corporations, direct economic control. They must include real political control through both existing and new neighborhood agencies, public, semi-public, and private non-profit. Only through such control will the resources actually be used for their intended purposes. Only thus will they be productive and regenerative. The principle of self-determination is inseparable and essential, both for practicality and for rightfulness. The proper allocation of resources to the meeting of priority needs will create full opportunity for employment. The creation of these opportunities for productive work, however, must be integrated with training and education to ensure immediate and long-range advancement and growth in skills. What we require and demand has three sides to it. All three must be kept together. No two are sufficient without the third. First, this nation must devote whatever resources are necessary to bring the physical and social conditions of its poor up to the standard suitable to the richest land in the world. In short, not a skirmish with poverty, but the elimination of poverty. Second, these resources must be committed in ways which will provide every unemployed and underemployed person the opportunity for employment and at maximum potential. Third, and inseparably, the control and direction of this effort and these resources must be in the hands of those for whom the benefits are intended. In a word, self-determination. What we will require and demand is an economic bill of rights. It is the resources we need with which to create the jobs we need, with which to create the goods and services we need, and with the power to do what we need, not what somebody else needs or thinks we need. This is a must on the American agenda. That is, if our nation is to survive. That was the dream of Dr. Martin Luther King. And like the brothers of Joseph as told in our Bible, his sick brothers of America cried out, "Behold, here cometh the dreamer. Let us therefore kill him, and then we will see what will become of his dream." It is a sad but true fact. They killed the dreamer in Memphis, Tennessee, 1 month and 4 days ago, but they cannot and will not kill his dreams, for he left behind a band of dedicated disciples and followers who are determined to work and suffer and live and die if necessary to make them all come true. And we have decided that we ain't going to let nobody turn us around. As I call upon you for your prayers, backing, counsel, and support, let me serve notice upon you today and upon the nation that there will be no quiet or so-called peace in this land until justice and equality cover the United States of America as the waters cover the sea. And that is the Reverend Ralph David Abernathy speaking at the Poor People's Campaign in 1968, May 8th of 1968. Have a blessed day. God bless you.